First of all, welcome to your second day of London Tech Week. I know yesterday was a very busy day full of announcements, so happy you're up bright and early to talk about the innovation strategy. So today's panel is on the UK innovation strategy 1 year on. Are we winning the global race for tech innovation? We thought this would be a good opportunity to bring some great speakers together to talk about the government's innovation strategy. So for those of you who are not, say, particularly familiar with it, about a year ago, the government published an innovation strategy aiming to make the UK an innovation global hub by 2035. Now, this was set against a background analysis that the government did of where it identified sort of slowing innovation and the higher costs of innovation in Western countries, and really wanted to take an analysis of how the UK can break through those barriers and become a global hub for innovation with a 2035 date stamped on it. They had 4 key pillars for doing this. So one was unleashing business, the other one was a focus on people, the other one was getting the right institutions and places to foster innovation, and another one was focusing on technology missions and specific technologies to foster in the UK. So what are we going to focus on today? Well, first of all, we're going to take a look at the innovation strategy, what it looked like a year ago, and also consider the changes that have happened. I think when the innovation strategy was published, frontline politicians hadn't really considered high levels of inflation, a war in Ukraine, serious supply chain crises, and the global economic uncertainty that we're having today. So a lot of our discussion is not just focused on what the innovation strategy said then, but how it's adapting to the world as it's changed over the last year, and how we can ensure that we meet that mission of the UK becoming a global innovation hub by 2035, despite those major disruptions. Thankfully, I don't have to know the answers to all of that, because I've got 4 excellent panelists with us who are going to be able to talk about that. So I'm very happy to be joined by Jonathan Lee Smith, Head of Scientific Affairs at BT, Matt Houlihan, Senior Director of Government Affairs at Cisco, Gurpreet Manku, Director of Policy at the British Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, and Tim Ryan, a Partner and Head of Commercial Media Technology at DAC Beechcroft LLP. So some great insights, I'm sure, from our panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves in turn, just give some quick thoughts on what the innovation strategy looks like 1 year on, and whether we're winning that global race for tech innovation. And then we're going to have a few questions and discussions with our panelists for around sort of 30 to 40 minutes before bringing in questions from the audience. You might have noticed your mics and cameras are switched off. So if you can drop any questions you've got in the chat, we'll bring those in during the Q&A. But also if we kind of rattle through the Q&A quicker, we'll sort of integrate those to the conversation as we go along. So hopefully looking forward to a very interesting discussion. But what I'll do, just so you can get to know our panelists a bit better, is hand over to each of them in turn just to introduce themselves. Jonathan, I'll go to you first.
Thank you very much, Neil. So yes, Jonathan Lee Smith from BT, where I'm Head of Scientific Affairs. I work in BT's Applied Research Department, based at our global R&D headquarters at Adastral Park in Suffolk. Now, my role is to engage with strategic research and innovation topics that are of clear long-term potential for BT, and that government is actually exploring the national strategy right now. So examples of that will be quantum technologies, which of course has been an 8 years and counting story. I think an emerging one is cyber physical infrastructure, and of course future communications, as actually government is sort of making a welcome entrance into helping shape research, long-term research in that area as well. I think for reflections, as Neil said, a lot has happened. So really, there's not been a huge amount of time, relatively speaking, from the publication of the innovation strategy. And we had a good sense of where the government is and what the government thinks about innovation. I think marking on particular points of progress might be a little challenging, but it set a good direction for us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Matt.
Thanks, Neil, and hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. So I am Matt Houlihan. I head up Government and Corporate Affairs at Cisco in the United Kingdom, Ireland and North Europe. I've been working for Cisco for 6 years and previously worked for government before then, partly in the area of science and innovation. So it's a topic that's very dear to my heart, but also clearly very important to the health and future of Cisco as well. In the UK, we have some wonderful programs, one of which we doubled down on yesterday, called Country Digital Acceleration, where we're really showing and investing in sort of how our sort of technology can change and improve, make more productive, make more innovative a particular sector or a particular public sector service. And so we're really pleased to have announced that. Just a couple of reflections, Neil, on the strategy. I think Jonathan's point is absolutely right. A year is quite a short time in the scale of things. But on the flip side, the world has changed a huge amount in that year, and I think the urgency of getting this right for the UK is never been higher. It's never been more pertinent that we really get to grips with this. There's a lot of work to do, and hopefully we'll explore some of that in the next few minutes.
Great, thanks very much, Matt. And definitely, I think the theme of change will be one that comes up in this conversation quite a lot. Gurpreet, I'm going to go to you next.
Hi everyone, I'm Gurpreet Manku. I'm the BVCA's Deputy Director General and I look after all of our policy work. Here at the BVCA, we're quite interested in the funding ecosystem, so how we fund all of this innovation and the growth in innovative businesses in the UK. So a lot of our work is actually focused around fund structuring, fundraising, the regulatory environment, as well as the tax environment. And one thing I would say is that since last year, probably the year before as well, given everything that happened with the pandemic, I've seen quite a huge amount of interest politically in venture capital and growth capital, and in particular around how to increase the pool of domestic institutional capital available for investment here. So making sure our pension money is benefiting from the returns on some of these investments. So I'll be talking a bit about that. That's sort of now transpired into a Treasury Select Committee inquiry into UK venture capital, which has taken place at the moment. And linked to that, I think I've seen quite a bit of progress on policy areas of interest to the ecosystem. So that includes things such as the investment areas that I've just mentioned, but also things such as R&D tax credits. I'll be talking a bit about that later on.
Brilliant, thank you, Gurpreet. And yeah, absolutely, it's definitely been an area where there's been a lot of political focus and kind of key programs that have been advancing. So it'll be great to get your views on those. And last but not least, Tim, I'll come to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Neil. Morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I head up the technology advisory team here at DAC Beechcroft. We're an international law firm with an HQ here in London. We're a full service firm. We do the usual things you'd expect a large firm to do. We advise clients across a range of different sectors, but my team predominantly works with both established and scaling tech and media businesses. So we help with things like IT systems, commercial contracts, IP, and data. But that goes right through to funding, investments, and other types of corporate activities. So good overlap with Gurpreet and her colleagues there. I guess, Neil, we see the pace or lack of it sometimes, but I can safely say we've seen an awful lot of pace, particularly over the last 12 months, and certainly a lot of evolution. Part of our role is to ensure, hopefully, that that's focused, and I guess that's why this sort of session is useful to overlap with you and colleagues there.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Tim. And it wouldn't be an innovation strategy and a Tech UK panel if we didn't start our first question focusing on some specific technologies. So in the innovation strategy, it set out 7 technology families, and we've seen those developed over the course of the last year. I think yesterday the digital strategy the government outlined talked about building on those through a semiconductor strategy, the AI strategy, and a quantum strategy. Now, Jonathan, I know you've done a lot of work particularly focused on quantum technology, so I wanted to get a sense from you around the progress we've seen over the past year and whether the government's getting it right on its approach to supporting the quantum sector.
Thank you again, Neil. I mean, yes, I mean, in many respects, it is very satisfying to see the UK reach the point where the government is confident enough and has recognised quantum technologies as a key strategic strength for the UK, but also a priority as well. It's been a relatively long journey for the National Quantum Technology Programme, which has really brought us to this point. So yes, we are looking forward to seeing a national quantum strategy, which I hope we will be seeing late summer, early autumn. In many respects, although it's been many years in getting to this point, actually it's quite an aggressive time frame from I think the starting whistle to say yes, we're going to produce one of these to getting it out of the door. I mean, there's been a lot of engagement with industry and academia so far. I think it's now being worked on. I look forward to seeing the drafts as it comes out. But this side of things, which is where we've seen a good methodical approach to what was a very new area, getting us to the point where we could see the strategic opportunity and starting to develop that strategy is really important. Of course, I look forward to seeing the contents of it and the specific actions. We do need to see a step up beyond where we've been, which is around academic investment and collaborative R&D. I've talked a lot about the need for national ambitions or missions, certainly in terms of communications, but I'm hopeful we will start to see that.
Yeah, and that's sort of the history of quantum technologies has been that UK excellence in research and academia, and now there's a big focus on how do we commercialise that and make it a successful sector in the UK. I wanted to just get a sense from you about how you think that is going. What should some of the government's focuses be in the upcoming strategy to ensure we get that commercialisation right?
Well, so we have a family of technologies in quantum computing, sensing, imaging, and quantum communications and timing as well, I should call out, although that usually gets packed in with other things. So, and there are different approaches. I mean, we have a national imperative around quantum computing. We need to see the National Quantum Computing Centre, and in a sense a strategy for that area has been laid out. That's a difficult path to tread, but that's underway. From my perspective, the next most, of course, is around quantum communications, and there we're very clear that we have done some excellent collaborative R&D work. We have proven the technology. It was less than a month ago that BT, with our partner Toshiba, announced the world's first commercial trial of a quantum secure communications network. Our interest is how do we go from commercial trials, localized trials, to a nationally available service. That is a big leap to be making, and it's not the kind of leap you can make on the timescales we think we need for the UK. You can't just play this out commercially, and that's the kind of area where we're strongly recommending that we see national ambitions to put in place quantum secure communications infrastructure and actually focus our efforts on delivering it. More collaborative R&D will not be sufficient to get us there. So that's an example. Two examples in a sense. We have a quantum computing strategy that's been in play for a while, quantum communications. In other technologies, we could see the need for interventions like quantum sensing and national accelerators to help pull all of industry. But we need to see different interventions around the different technology areas now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reflection that you can't just have one strategy for every kind of technology, but obviously in the world of policy making, and particularly when it comes to talking to the Treasury, there only is so much money around to invest in these things. So we as a sector have to try and convince the government to make big bets. So when you're kind of engaging with the government, what are the real benefits that you're suggesting to them and telling them that a strong quantum strategy could deliver for the UK?
Well, there's the opportunity and unfortunately the threat that comes with mainly around quantum computing, of course. If the UK economy at large is to leverage the potential of quantum computing, we need to have them available within the country for use by businesses as soon as possible. Where they come from, I mean, obviously we want UK technology to be at the heart of that, but ultimately where businesses such as BT get it from is not necessarily the priority. The priority is it is available to us, and it is available reliably, if you like, hence the government's path setting up the NQCC to do this. So that would be, one. I mean, quantum communications, I think, is on the potential threat side. We can see the potential issues around quantum computing and the damage it does to current encryption techniques. There are alternative technologies to try and mitigate that, post-quantum cryptography, but there has always been an earlier opportunity around quantum key distribution to enable businesses to start to secure themselves now. So from BT's point of view, we started on the early opportunity to make sure we have these capabilities, hence the quantum secure comms trial. But we need to prepare the UK economy as a whole. We need to make this technology available to people, to businesses ahead of time, not when it is too late. And that means an explicit endeavour to deliver that. Unfortunately, just relying on the commercial side of it may not deliver that at a national scale in the timeframe that we need.
So strategic in all senses, economic security, but also kind of for our future prosperity. Gurpreet, one thing we always, just kind of sticking with the theme of commercialization and delivery and rollout, one thing which we always hear is scale-up funding in the UK is lacking. We've got a good, strong startup investment scene, and this is highlighted in the innovation strategy, but our scale-up funding is still a bit weak. What are sort of your reflections over the last year, and also sort of thinking about the statistics which came out yesterday from London Tech Week? How are we doing on that mission to ensure we've got the right amount of scale-up funding to help commercialise and grow our sector?
So our starting point is that the UK actually has a very successful venture capital and growth capital funds industry. When we look at our data on performance, VC funds investing since 2011 generated an annualized return of 22% on return on capital, and that's to the 31st of December 2020. So the numbers wouldn't have changed too much since then. So that's sustained success. But the key challenge that's been raised with us for some years has been that it's difficult for those funds themselves to get bigger. And so when we think about scale-up capital, we're thinking about the overall fund size. I'm conscious that actually, others will also be thinking about money going into later stages of venture financing, and also the size of those rounds in the UK compared to the US, where they are lower. I mean, the gap is definitely narrowing. And a few years ago, obviously, we had the creation of British Patient Capital. And we continue to be very supportive of the government funding these schemes, which have a catalytic effect of drawing in additional capital. But when we're looking at the pools of capital that are here and where our fundraising typically comes from, traditionally, a lot of it is from pension funds. But again, historically, a lot of it is from US and Canadian pension funds. So the big question mark in the UK is, how do we mobilise more of our pension money into illiquid asset classes such as venture capital and growth capital, as well as broader private capital strategies? It used to be invested, so certainly a number of DB schemes used to be invested, and because you invest over the long term, a number of them are still, heavily engaged in the industry. But if we're looking at new pools of capital, most of our money is going into DC pension schemes because of the regulation required in that area. As it's our money, the government's asking us to put aside. Do you need some protections around that? Because of the regulation around that area, it is much more tricky and complex to invest into illiquid asset classes, because those pension schemes are used to liquidity, they're used to low fees, they're used to being able to value things easily, and so forth. So there's a huge range of complex issues in this space. The government's done some great work in recent years by basically just bringing different parts of the community together through the Productive Finance Working Group. You've got institutional investors, you've got the advisors to trustees, you've got the platforms that develop these products, you've got insurance companies, everyone working together to discuss, debate, and think through potential solutions. So I'm not going to, downplay the importance of issues such as, how do you allocate fees in long-term asset classes to people who are in these products for a short period of time. That is a complicated area. But one of the key gating items we've had is that the charge cap that applies to auto enrolment schemes includes performance fees, and in our world that includes carried interest, because that's a profit share and the upside can be big, particularly if the returns in these funds are quite high. It means you breach the cap, and through fear of breaching the cap, trustees aren't allocating at the moment. That's a key sort of gating item for our industry. But the DWP is making moves to exempt well-designed performance fees from the cap. and Treasury, the FCA and others are working on a new authorised fund vehicle, the Long-Term Asset Fund, which could also open up access to institutional investors who want a bit more liquidity than they used to in our world, and also more sophisticated investors as well who could be interested. So it is a complex area, but I've seen more progress over the last 18 months or so than I have done in the last 10 years. So I think there are positive moves in this area. Sticking with the theme of regulation, looking at the capital requirements that apply to insurance companies is big. And I know we're talking about scale-up capital, but we still need the feeder to be there. So levels of seed capital funding have fallen in recent years, and one of the areas that we're looking at the moment and speaking to government about is renewing EIS and VCT. There's a sunset clause that applies to those schemes for shares issued before April 2025, and I know that's a few years out, but it does affect the funding pipeline in that part of the market. So we need good companies to invest in as they get to scale up phase. So you still need to continue to feed the seed and startup community as well with capital. So the angel community, EIS funds, VCTs are also a crucial part of the funding ecosystem. So lots there. I know some of the progress might feel a bit slow, but it is all directionally correct, and it's politically quite positive as well.
Yeah, thank you, Gurpreet. A really good canter through basically all the issues which we hear about regularly facing the kind of not just the scale up side, but equally some of the challenges in the smaller scale and angel community. I mean, one thing which often comes across for us in conversations is it's not just a regulatory challenge, but it's also a cultural challenge within the UK's funding ecosystem. But how do we basically become a bit more American in our willingness to invest in more liquid assets and tech classes? I was just wondering from you, what if you had a sort of a magic wand or a list that you could hand over to the Chancellor tomorrow for the kind of top 3 actions you could take over the next few years? It doesn't have to be 3, but what would be the most immediate actions you think government should be pressing on ahead with to address not just the regulatory, but also the cultural change we need in the UK investment community?
I think the cultural thing is something that could be addressed by being able to demonstrate returns being made by other institutional investors in the UK. You know, people talk about education, but I don't think it's about that. It's about developing the confidence, because it's a long-term asset class, like a very long-term asset class in some cases, if you're thinking about life sciences in particular. So where the government could help is by helping with this institutional capital, unlocking of institutional capital, whether it's DC or Solvency II. There will be organisations out there, institutions out there that do this investment in the DB space. So just giving them the ability to do it with other pots of capital that they have will be helpful. The role of the government, where it can be helpful, is again that confidence bit, the catalytical effect. So using institutions like the British Business Bank, British Patient Capital, and some of the new programs that have been created like Future Fund is potentially helpful, where they act as a co-investor. So bring in investors who haven't done this before, to help guide them to some really good opportunities. So you've got this happening already in deep tech and life sciences as well. So I think that's where it's got an important role. And I know that they're doing quite a bit of work on international engagement as well. So I think that in itself will help. I think a period of stability on tax and regulatory policy is also helpful as well, because when investors are thinking about allocating capital, they don't want to have to worry about changes 5 to 6 years down the line. So that's also going to be important. So the commitment to some stability there.
No, I think that's all stuff we've heard as well, particularly in light of the Chancellor potentially making some announcements around business incentives at the next budget. Stability has come out as a real thing. You know, make sure that whatever you decide across the people, capital and ideas buckets, make sure these are permanent so companies can have some long-term investment. And certainly on the funding side, that also makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go to Matt after this before going to Tim, but obviously as an international business, when you're weighing up where you place innovation investment and your R&D locations, you're obviously considering a huge multitude of different factors: access to skills, funding, the strategic position the UK is placing on certain technologies. You've obviously just made a big announcement about investments you're making in the UK. So what is it that the UK is getting right, but where do you think we could also go a bit further?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question, both of those questions, is almost the same thing. It's skills. And I think the UK's got a lot going for it in terms of skills, in that we've got a very effective education system. We've got a great set of universities, obviously, in this country, and they're real, global assets that we need to be proud of and elevate. But, maybe to Alice's point in the chat there, that this is a very dynamic environment that we're in, and we can't sort of rest on our laurels in terms of skills. The amount of economic churn that we're seeing at the moment, and the amount of change that we're seeing in terms of businesses and the types of jobs and the types of approach to work is just immense, and that means that our approach to skills, and from our lens, digital skills in particular, has to keep moving at a very, very fast pace. So yes, I think we do get skills right, and certainly we've got some great assets like universities in this country that we need to continue to sort of elevate and boost. But I think we need to be really radical in terms of how we think about reskilling, how we think about the skills that kids coming through the education system are getting at the moment, and importantly, how we make people kind of work ready in the context of not really knowing what jobs are going to be like in even in the nearest term. There's a lot been said around having more diversity in terms of routes of education, and I think that's really to the government's credit, actually, and we should applaud that, in that we do need more apprentices, we need more vocational routes, we need more things like T-levels and technical colleges, and we need to remove stigmas from doing those sorts of things. But we need to go much further, I think, and have a really radical approach in terms of those technical and vocational skills, which will make people and businesses out there much more able to absorb innovation, and also create the people who are right at the sort of elite of the skills scene in terms of pushing forward those new innovations that we need to see. So I think that's probably my broader answer, Neil. But I think the point about skills is just so important, and we can't take our eye off it.
No, great. I mean, that's come out. I think you can't have a conversation with, from my experience, you won't have a conversation with any tech company or anyone interested in the tech sector without skills featuring somewhere in the conversation. And the fact that it has that level of pervasiveness shows just the strategic importance to our sector. The government, like in the digital strategy yesterday, what I think was noticeable was how much the skills section took up of kind of the key recommendations they were making. It's clearly one of the big areas they're trying to push. And ahead of the budget this year, the Chancellor is thinking about how to better incentivise skills training, not just through review of the apprenticeship levy, but also taking a wider look about how the tax system could support that. Not necessarily just sticking to those buckets, but for you as a company, what would make the biggest difference in terms of helping to maybe not only necessarily train, but also to bring in more talent?
Well, we play an active role, as people may be aware, in terms of delivering some digital training courses. We have a free platform. So it's not a plug, but just I want to make a broader point. We have a free platform called Networking Academy, and we actually see about 50,000 Brits, people in the UK, going through that each year, which is great, and it teaches very vocational IT networking and cybersecurity and coding courses, which is good. There are lots of other companies out there that do similar things, which create these brilliant resources. We've seen a bit of a move from government to try and bring some of those together. I think we need the convening power of government to step in, to look at what really good vocational training courses are out there, and to really shine a spotlight and provide a bit of coordination for what those look like as they're sort of packaged for people who are looking to get into this world. And I'd really like to see government focus there. There's a broader point, Neil, around that I don't know if you're going to come on to later, but just around how the UK talks about itself as well, because I'm conscious as a US company, representing a US company here, I think we could hear a lot more from the UK in general about what the UK has to offer in terms of skills and in terms of being a a strong investment environment. This is London Tech Week this week. Let's use that as a platform and beyond to talk to companies like ours at every level about the opportunities. And I don't think we do enough of that, particularly now where there's this urgency around, and particularly around things like skills and our universities and the great increase in R&D funding that we're expecting, etc. That we should be proud of and we should be talking more about.
No, I would totally agree with that. And I think one thing which is really, not to talk about another strategy, the innovation strategy, but when I was looking at the digital strategy yesterday, they were really clear and positive about the various different visa routes they'd offered for our sector and be really pushing forward. And that I know is something that DCMS and the Treasury have been kind of championing. And it's good to see such a, which is often quite a difficult policy area around immigration, where there've been a lot of successes for the sector. So absolutely think those kind of championing those initiatives and showing off what we've done is really important, and would wholeheartedly agree with your comments around getting a bit more coordination in the kind of various vocational routes which are being offered, not just by Cisco, but lots of companies across the tech sector to try and address their skill shortages. Tim, I wanted to come to you last. Now we've talked about how to support specific technologies at a kind of strategic level, what the funding environment looks like, and how we get the right skills. But one thing which was put very strongly by the innovation strategy was around regulation, and whether we are able to set up the kind of agile, innovative regulatory system, which has kind of long been promised after the Brexit referendum. So I wanted to get a sense from you about, when your clients come to you, how does the regulatory system help support innovation and R&D, and where do you think the UK could potentially be doing better?
I mean, often, Neil, it's about pace. I think several of the panel have already talked about speed of change and pace. So it's very important that the regulation and law doesn't stifle innovation, but is there to provide some of the guide rails around the expansion of certain technologies and the legalities of them. A client once said to me, lawyers can be like the brakes. It's not overly flattering to be talked about as brakes, but then he went on to say, but without the brakes, the car crashes. So I've sort of always held on to that. And just on the point around people, because it definitely overlaps with innovation and regulation, I don't think that it's possible to divorce some of the skills here. For example, legal, corporate, technology, marketing, completely from each other. There's a significant amount of overlap, and we focus on our people. Obviously they're lawyers, but we focus on their education from a technology perspective, from a data perspective, so that when the tech evolves and grows, as it invariably does, we're ready for that from an ops perspective as well as from a legal perspective, and hopefully that helps our clients. Now, we actively assist various public bodies with regulation and various aspects of and areas of government with regulation evolution. I think there are areas such as, for example, artificial intelligence, where as that evolves, it's important to look at ethics, and we've been actively involved in looking at the ethics of AI, and in fact we've been involved in a large international publication about that, to ensure that black box AI in healthcare or in education or wherever it may be is suitably regulated, so that things like bias in various aspects don't break the system before it is even really started. So again, there's a balance here between speed of progress and evolution. I don't think we can underestimate just how difficult life can be made if we sit in our different silos. And I don't think we can overestimate the importance of cross-border learning. So I was in Palo Alto and San Francisco a couple of weeks ago on business, and it's clear there's a huge amount of interest in the UK, still in multiple areas. I mean, a couple I was talking about were fintech and health tech, where we're seen as genuinely cutting edge still, because of several of the people on this sort of panel, in fact. So I think strategically extremely important that we get the regulation right. We all continue to contribute and support, with the ultimate goal of it being pragmatic and supportive of business, and not jamming on the brakes. And that's where we need to come together as a group.
I think that's exactly right. And this balance between responsible innovation, agility, while also being clear with business about what you can and can't do is I think going to be a kind of permanent discussion that we're going to be having in the UK, whether we're going too far one direction and trying to balance out. Where have you seen really good examples of this happening, or where would you like to see the government go further?
So in terms of regulation and in terms of evolution of law, the amount of learnings I think we all took from the past few years in terms of how we all work, how we communicate in this sort of environment, for example, but also in particular verticals such as the healthcare industry and others. We have seen a lot of common sense approach. We have seen collaboration between private and public in a way which has been very mutually beneficial. I think that the level of consultation sometimes can be a little bit behind the curve, but that isn't to do with finger pointing. That's to do with a practical reality of life. So, you know, my firm and others actively volunteer to contribute when we can, rather than necessarily being asked to do it, because it has to be a two-way street, Neil, and that's I think where we can all pull together a little more. We're seeing areas such as, for example, I'll just pick another one, online harm. There's a lot of work being done at the moment to look at legislation around online harm. We're doing our own bit there to look at the evolution and the balance between the expansion of big tech and the positioning in the UK of certain of those businesses with consumer interests and the impending legislation around online harm and the potential for Ofcom to fine those who go the wrong side of that line in law is one, and it's a trend I think we'll just continue to see happening. But again, it's the balance there between, you know, progress, big commerce, and core protection. It's a very important line to tread.
Yeah, and equally also there's that question of where do these big regulatory regimes, data protection, online safety, competition, communication security overlap with each other, and what is the balance between the regulators on either side, and how do you ensure that they kind of don't cut across each other and create uncertainty? So I don't think, Tim, you'll be short of work over the next few years with companies coming to you looking for advice, and also your continued work with government. I'm going to open up to questions for our audience to kind of shoot in. The first one, which I think is great, a very simple question from Angela, is how do universities get involved in these kind of conversations? You know, if you look at the UK, it's been mentioned before, we have a fantastic university sector. Even if you think about the levelling up strategy, you know, almost every kind of key levelling up region of the UK has both a Russell Group university, but also a collection of other universities. But there's been lots of commentary about universities not necessarily ensuring that there's economic growth in the area, or their criticism of how they engage with businesses. So I wanted to get a sense from you how we can better utilise and leverage our university network. I'll open up. Who would like to come in first? Jonathan and then Matt.
Excuse me, hopefully my voice will clear itself. I mean, I think there's absolutely a role for all universities, starting from the local environment. I mean, those are the touch point for many businesses, the opportunity to engage with their local institutions. I guess national companies such as BT, we will tend to focus on, well, the geography is not so much of importance to us, so we'll follow the areas. But clearly, the institutions that are local to businesses ought to be, and often will be, their first port of call. So, you know, that was one of the pillars in the strategy. We saw the first couple of waves and strength in places. I don't think we've seen any follow-up there, but continuing to invest in the local economies, and because ultimately the innovation takes place on the ground, so supporting the local economies to focus on what they need to do, and in particular what the businesses need of them, will be critical. I think there's also a piece around universities recognizing that they do have an additional role. They do need to do that translational piece, you know, what we would call applied research in-house, to be able to take that research out into the businesses themselves rather than just being a source of point expertise. And so I do think there's a national need for applied research capabilities in institutions.
And Matt?
Yeah, one of the points I wanted to make coming into this webinar was around the importance of collaboration in this country between businesses and universities and other organisations, and it just feels like a really pertinent time to make it, because one of the things that really works in terms of sort of encouraging Cisco investment in innovation in the UK is some of the collaborative research programs that we've got run through organisations like UKRI and some of the 5G test beds, for example, that we've seen DCMS lead on. And it strikes me as a really good model to ensure that we're getting businesses and universities to work very closely together on some of the live application and development of different technological innovations to the benefit of the UK. So I'd say that is certainly one route, but I think beneath Angela's question is, I mean, there's so many different ways of answering it, because I think there's so many different ways of universities to contribute to this discussion. Skills being, an obvious one, and in many other ways as well. But I certainly sort of focus on that collaboration piece. It's worked well for Cisco, and it's led to lots and lots of very positive relationships between Cisco and universities right across the country. But I'm sure there's a lot more that we could do with the right sort of funding mechanisms in place to incentivise us to do that.
Thanks very much, Matt and Jonathan. Gurpreet, I wanted to just come to you in this question of universities. One thing which we've been looking at recently is the connection between universities and VC funding funds. UCL and Imperial College in particular have quite strong innovator funds and support funds. Is this a model that we think could be rolled out to other universities across the UK, or is it something which sort of fits London, or potentially could be incentivised or more widely?
I think we should look at all options out there. So that's an example which we're familiar with, and they're connected to our investor ecosystem here at the BVCA as well. You've had development of clusters around universities, so Oxford, Cambridge goes without saying, but also up in Newcastle and Manchester. We keep emphasising the need to support, I'd say, smaller venture funds, which are regional and national in nature. So you've got a few BBB programs that are focused on that, and that's been expanded out in the recent budgets as well. And the connectivity with the angels is also critically quite important if you're talking about early stage, very early stage, I guess, startup and innovation coming out of universities there. So I mean, there's been a lot of good work in this area over the last few years as well. It's just thinking about which structures work, how much of the IP do universities retain versus share out. I know that's a key point of discussion as well. That applied bit, which I think Jonathan was talking about, which is crucial as well. There is, you get the capital in, like I said, and we're working quite hard to do that. But you need you need a base of investable companies to invest in as well. So building out those local ecosystems around universities is critically important as well. And just picking up on one of the other questions around education and bringing in minority groups as well, and just building a more diverse ecosystem. I think there is something for the government to do here in terms of thinking about how we talk about entrepreneurship, financial planning and so forth earlier on in the curriculum. I don't know how much it is covered, but there is by the time people are thinking about careers and investment, they've already made the decision at school age whether to come to this route. So there is something around promoting the industry to much younger people, and also returnships as well. I think that's an area we've been talking about internally as well. Like, how do you bring back people into the workforce who may have left it temporarily, as well, because they will have skills which are still relevant and important. And given the the war for talent. I think all of us in this call have had difficulties recruiting in the last couple of years. We need to have, we need to be thinking about all options and being flexible.
Just a couple of seconds on that, Neil. I couldn't endorse that more. We have our own, for example, return to work scheme here, where people have taken time out from the profession for whatever reason. We certainly have our arms open there, not only because their skills are still relevant, but they also have other skills which make them a better, often more rounded, commercially aware, grown-up advisor, which is a very valuable thing. And just on the national point, we're deliberately structured right across the UK in major cities simply because we don't see a particular point as the hub and other areas as the spoke. The hub will vary and the spoke delivery will change depending on the sector, the industry, and where the points of experience are. So I can't really emphasize enough the need to collaborate nationally, and I do think the US see us slightly odd that we don't do that when they have an area in Silicon Valley which is 1,500, 2,000 square miles, and they see that as one small part of their ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really strong point there, particularly around the need to not only bring in people from different geographical locations, but also from a variety of different backgrounds. How are you going to get different ideas and also tailor your products to different communities if you don't have those people working for you? Equally, we also have a massive skill shortage in this sector, so we should be looking for talent wherever we can find it. Jonathan, you had a point there just before Tim came in. I don't know if you want to come back.
Yes. So, Gurpreet, you mentioned intellectual property under the sort of the VC model for universities. You said I was going to emphasize that we do have this tension, of course, that in order to spin out a company, typically it's going to require some sort of intellectual property. And so there are also these conversations we have about sometimes universities are holding on to the intellectual property too hard, and that we aren't able to make use of it and actually leverage it commercially and for the benefit of the UK. So we do need to, there's no obvious answer, but we do need to recognise, when you are spinning out a company, you are locking that IP in. And so if that's the primary intent, which it isn't, but if that became the primary intent for university, suddenly you're seeing a lot of intellectual property getting locked in, and now at the fate of whether or not a startup succeeds. It is just a tension, but it does need to be recognised that we can't, from an industry point of view, we can't say, hey, we want the IP, and also say we want to see startups and not really take these things into consideration. We've talked about skills a lot. I mean, I think it and the need for coordination. I mean, Matt mentioned this up front. There is a degree of coordination required. A lot of large businesses are out there doing what they can. BT has its programs as well. And the 50,000 you mentioned, Matt, is a material number, but we know it doesn't add up to enough. And we also know, we never take skills off the list, any topic off the list. We're running with AI, data science, cybersecurity, quantum technologies, comms technologies. At some point this becomes white noise to the education system. So there's a degree of us sorting out our interventions, but also how we articulate and boil this down in a way that the education system, from primary all the way along, can actually do something for us. So
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads there, so I think some excellent points well made. We've only got a few minutes left, so I just had one question for Tim before I've got a final question for the whole group. Tim, one thing when we're talking about universities, that's often coming up with new ideas, things that are pushing regulatory boundaries, and there's always a question around, particularly in relation to IP, but also deep tech more generally. How do small companies, particularly innovative companies, deal with the different regulation and legal landscape out there? So I just wanted to get a sense from you about whether are we putting too much burden on companies like that? Are they facing too many questions? What's your sense of the landscape at the moment?
A good one, I think, Neil. I mean, Jonathan touched on it there. For me, it's always about getting the big picture, really important issues such as IP, data sovereignty, networks of risk, all this sort of stuff on the table early. Very rarely are these things irreconcilable. They're usually not dealt with soon enough. And actually, there are mechanisms, we have toolkits we can put in front of people to educate on these things, to empower on these things, rather than to wait until the deal arrives and then have to learn the topic and plow through lots of paper without that having already been considered. So I think timing is crucial there. And I think all of us on this call can do a lot to contribute to that. I know big corporates like BT, Cisco, others certainly do already, and welcome that sort of education. The other thing I think can also be very helpful is when the larger corporates take an approach with those they contract with, for example, so that there is a level of balance around the paper that can be put in front of the scaling businesses. Sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming, and I think that can be improved on, and we're working on that in various ways. And I suppose the final thing I'd mention is we've seen a lot of success in this country with the various sandboxes that exist. So the FCA sandbox, for example, the ICO sandbox, where there is encouragement to evolve without fear of the regulation and education to ensure compliance. I don't think that can be overstated, and I think we probably need more of that, actually.
Yeah, I would totally agree. One of the big suggestions that Technicate put in ahead of the innovation strategy was to really expand those sandboxing, living labs, testbed schemes across the piece, because they're so important for the sector. And when often we were finding that when a company gets into the sandbox, it's almost like a gold star, which then helps it attract more VC funding and investment into what they're doing. So expanding that more and more just seems like quite a low-cost way of supporting the sector more generally. Anyway, we have about 5 minutes left. So if I can be presumptuous and try and sum up the conversation so far, from what I understand from our panelists, since the innovation strategy was launched last year, big ambitions set out. We've seen some good progress, some particularly good references to government initiatives across funding, what they've been doing on skills, regulation, but also on some of those specific tech strategies. But I think we would be kidding ourselves to say if the innovation strategy being completed in a year, so lots more to do as we run up to that 2035 date the government set. If each of you were to give the government one piece of homework to do over the next 12 months to make progress on, by the time, say, we came back in 12 months to talk about this again, what would your recommendation for them to be? What would your recommendation for them to focus on be? I'll go to Matt first.
Well, look, I've talked about skills already, and that's, I think, the obvious thing I would say, but maybe to try and go for a slightly different tack. I'd say the international side of things. We're clearly in a much more complex world at the moment. There's some geopolitical realities that are really coming to the fore, and I think that means that international collaboration with like-minded, trusted countries right around the world is going to be ever more important. And the government sort of navigating that and leveraging that through its new trade agenda, which has been very vigorous, is going to be really important. So how do we use that trade agenda, and how do we use that sort of new positioning of the UK in the world to create the right sort of trade agreements that UK companies will benefit from in terms of selling innovative products abroad, but also leverage investment into the country as well that will help with the innovation ecosystem here. There's a lot to be done in that space still, I think.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree, definitely both at the kind of FTA level, but also that sub-FTA level you mentioned. Tim, I'll pick on you next, sorry.
Thanks, Neil. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen is a focus on public sector procurement driving innovation, actually, so that we have environments where procurement mechanisms are structured to assist in and or encourage that sort of innovation. So vaccine task force, for example, there was a clear intent and process to get to an innovation pipeline. So more encouragement of innovation via that sort of mechanism, Neil.
Thank you, Tim. Gurpreet, I'll go to you next.
I'm going to be cheeky and make it a little bit thematic, so I can chuck a few things in. So I'd say keep up the pace with developing fit for purpose policy, reform in the UK across a number of different areas, and continue to engage with industry. So we talked a lot about investment and unlocking institutional investment, which I think is key, and I would have picked that as one area. But I was also just sitting here thinking about exits as well. So there's been a lot of reform recently on the UK market, so public markets, listings review. The FCA has been doing a huge amount of work, which they need to keep pace on. But national security, I think that's a key area for this industry in particular. The National Security and Investment Act is still relatively new. We are reviewing it. We are getting feedback. It's all good and well developing innovation here, but we do want to be able to sell it at some point or exit our investments at some point as well. So we do need to be quite mindful and conscious of that. And that's where I think this industry, this community in particular, could help by sharing feedback on those 17 sensitive sectors to help the government develop its knowledge on what is a national security risk and what isn't.
I would definitely agree, and I could see Tim nodding there that implementation of the NSI Act could make up an entirely separate webinar. So that's the National Security Investment Act for any of you who aren't aware. Anyway, we'll finish off where we started. So I'll go back to Jonathan for some final remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I guess a recommendation from me would be for government to do an honest and 1-year assessment of the strategy itself to see where it believes it at and where it might want to refine its plans. I mean, we've been talking around it, if you like, but in fact, this is a good time to have a look at it honestly and with no judgment from me anyway, going, what do we think this looks like and what do we actually need to be doing going forward? Otherwise, I would actually, in terms of one thing, I would go with Matt, actually. I do think the international side of things is going to become incredibly important on the telecom side. We're going to, as we start to move into the new technologies and we start to look at the international collaborations, how we start to do, say, pre-commercial standardization work, we're in danger of losing a very important vehicle in Horizon and the Horizon program. We do need these bilateral agreements so that we can start to collaborate internationally. And also diversification is really important in our industry. That is going to require inward investment. It's going to require international players coming in, but it's going to require money coming in, and we need to focus on how we pull together as an ecosystem to do that.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I got international collaboration twice, public sector procurement, the National Security Investment Act, plus a variety of other funding initiatives. So if there's anyone from the government listening, plenty to be getting on with over the next 12 months. Thank you very much, Matt, Ryan, Gurpreet and Jonathan. It's been a great discussion. For those in the chat, this will be recorded and posted online, so you can watch back and you can share it with your friends. But from us here at Tech UK, I'll wish you a happy rest of London Tech Week and thank you very much for joining us. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.